All right, everyone, welcome back to the Kyle Anzalone Show. We have a lot to talk about on today's show, breaking down some clips from Donald Trump and Lindsey Graham, who had some interesting things to say on the war in Ukraine, but particularly when it comes to Syria. And Senator Graham is now very terrified of the situation there, which he played a fundamental role in creating. So I really want to talk about all of this on today's show. For everybody listening live, if you're not already subscribed to the YouTube channel, go ahead and do that. That is going to help us generate the followers we need, build an audience, and be ready to continue to grow. Additionally, if you are watching on YouTube, leave us a comment. Let us know how you like the current content. If there is something you want me to break down in the future, go ahead and post that as well. Be very happy to engage. All right, let's go ahead and start by playing the first clip we have on today's show. This is a clip from Donald Trump's interview on Fox News with Maria Bartiromo, where he said something kind of shocking.
Are you comfortable with that? The fact that you walked away and Ukraine may not survive?
Well, it may not survive anyway, but, we have some weaknesses with Russia. It takes two. Look. It was not going to happen, that war, and it happened. So now we're stuck with this mess.
So here Donald Trump is, saying again, and we hear this time and time again, that he's stuck with Biden's mess when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And there certainly is some truth to that. But one of the real problems is Trump doesn't seem to understand why it's a mess, which we're going to get into the next clip. But I thought it was really shocking that he said that Ukraine might not be a state anymore. Here's a case where I think Donald Trump is actually buying some of the propaganda that sells us on the war in Ukraine rather than debunking it. He should be telling Maria Bartiromo that Russia doesn't even want to take all of Ukraine. Their territorial aspirations in 2022 were simply for Kiev and the West to recognize the Russian sovereignty over the Crimean Peninsula, something that Russia annexed in 2024 in response to U.S. coup in Kiev, and also something that was backed by a popular referendum there. Additionally, Trump could be explaining that Putin isn't looking to take all of Ukraine, that Putin is looking for Kiev to become neutral. And so the idea that we have to worry about losing all of Ukraine is simply absurd. And understanding that the Russian position is far more realistic than what's being presented in the mainstream media will help to break down important propaganda that's going to get in the way of Trump if he actually does want to end this war. And so it's very unfortunate that he doesn't understand that and continues to amplify these narratives that are simply against what he wants to do and also simply untrue. Russia's desire isn't to take all of Ukraine and then move on to Eastern Europe, Poland, and Romania. But these are the ideas that we hear time and time again from the U.S. mainstream media and our European allies. So next up, another clip from Donald Trump discussing his first administration policy when it comes to Russia. And here Trump speaks the truth.
Nobody has been tougher on Russia than Donald Trump. Nobody. And they know that. They know that. Just look at the things I just told you. The pipeline, I stopped it. The biggest job they've ever done was the pipeline, Nord Stream 2. Nobody ever heard of it until I came along. They were building it happily. They were going to supply Germany and everybody else all over Europe. And what did I do? I stopped it. The biggest economic job they've ever had, I stopped it. Biden got in. On the second day, he approved it. He said, let it go forward. It was totally stopped. Just that one thing alone tells you everything. No, I was tough. At the same time, I got along with Putin. I got along with Kim Jong-un. I got along with President Xi. But nobody was tougher, like on China, than I was.
So the first part of that statement is what Trump really does get right. And it's important to highlight this because the narrative in the United States of America is that Trump in 2017 and during his first administration was soft on Russia, that Putin wanted to cozy up with dictators around the world and embrace Russia. And this inherently weakened the American position, and that this is what led to the invasion of Ukraine. But what actually happened was during the campaign season, Trump was talking about getting along better with Russia. He was basically saying that what had happened was that Biden had made enemies with both Moscow and Beijing, and that Trump wanted to get along better with Moscow because he viewed China as the bigger threat. Well, what happened is that China, or that, excuse me, that the Russiagate story plagues his first administration. And unfortunately, Donald Trump is never able to communicate to the American people what was so thoroughly and well documented by a variety of great and legendary American journalists like Glenn Greenwald, like Matt Taibbi, like Aaron Mate, like Michael Tracy, who time and time again explained how these narratives that there was this compromise, that Putin had compromised Donald Trump and owned him, or that Donald Trump was acting as an agent of the Kremlin, or that the Kremlin rigged the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton and for Donald Trump. And because of this, Donald Trump was moved politically. His desire to get along better with Putin, to move Moscow away from Beijing and towards the rest, was undermined by this narrative. Yes, he went and held a summit with Putin in Helsinki. And sure, it was good that there was communication between the American and the Russian leaders. But what happened? During his administration, actually, there was the fake neurological weapons attack against the Skripals in the UK. I don't know if you even remember this story, but it's actually really important to the US and Russian relationship, because what happens is they invent this narrative that Putin used this secret Soviet era chemical weapon called Novichok, and they planted it and they used it to kill or try to kill Sergei Skripal and his daughter Yulia, I believe, in the UK. Except they survived what was supposed to be one of the most deadly chemical weapons in history. And when the evidence came out, it became pretty clear that Putin actually wasn't behind this, and that the Novichok may not have even been used in this attack. And yet Donald Trump placed sanctions on Russia over this. He had expelled 50 Russian diplomats from the United States over this. And as his administration continued, he worked against the Nord Stream pipeline that would have economically integrated even more so Russia and Europe. He sanctioned Russia over various election interfering claims and all kinds of other reasons, like the Crimean Peninsula. And importantly, he expelled Russian diplomats, and he didn't take Ukrainian NATO membership off the table, but also began sending and selling Ukraine weapons. During his administration, the CIA was training the Ukrainians on on insurgency tactics. For when the Russian invasion actually happened, they would be ready to, set off bombs in Russian cities and things like this. And so Trump actually was very tough against Russia. Now, the thing he gets wrong at the end of his statement there is he says, Putin, Kim, and Xi, I had a great relationship with all of these leaders, but it didn't net anything. Sure, Donald Trump had 3 different summits with Kim Jong-un, and it's great that he became the first American leader to go to the demilitarized zone. But did he actually make any permanent agreements with the North Koreans? No, because he brought John Bolton to a summit with Kim Jong-un, and John Bolton scuttled the deal. Did he actually make any agreements with Russia? No, he actually allowed John Bolton again to get out of the INF and the Open Skies Treaty. And all he managed to accomplish with China is starting a new trade war. And so Donald Trump has this vision, peace through strength. On the last episode of the show, we talked about how during his address to Congress, he was saying how that the Afghan war is what opened the door for Putin to invade Ukraine. And this idea that Biden was weak and that's why Putin took advantage. He still really doesn't understand the situations here or how geopolitics work. And it's going to make him very, very difficult for Trump to accomplish any of his goals. And so this is now one more thing I wanted to mention is there was this post by Trump that he made on Truth Social, which is threatening towards Russia. He said, based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I am strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and a final settlement agreement on peace is reached. Russia and Ukraine, get to the table now before it's too late. Thank you. And as we talked about on this show over the past 6 weeks during the beginning of the Trump administration, the one thing he's really done right when it it comes to Ukraine negotiations is rather than attacking and constantly demonizing Vladimir Putin, he's engaging with the Russians. And, he's not, I don't think, being overly kind to Vladimir Putin, but he's not being unnecessarily rude or belligerent. And this is the first step in the wrong direction. Now, I think it's important to discuss here what happened, I think. And as ultimately the problem is Trump is reactionary. Whatever headline is put in front of him, whatever someone tells him, he immediately reacts to without asking more questions like, why did this happen? Which is always important. So if we actually look at what happened over the past week in Ukraine, when Trump cut off intelligence to the Ukrainians, it seems Kiev attempted to then mount one last major strike on Russian cities and energy infrastructure. They took out or tried to hit, at least the Ukrainians claim they successfully did hit, 2 pipelines, 2 oil refineries, and 1 fuel storage depot. And in fact, one of those refineries was over 500 miles from the front lines. And so that certainly relied on U.S. intelligence to do. Now we've seen throughout the war, every time Ukraine strikes Russian energy infrastructure, Russia responds with a major attack in Ukraine. And that's what's happened on Thursday was Russia hit a bunch of Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So then that story is put on Donald Trump's desk and he issues a threat to Russia without seeing the bigger picture here. So next up, I want to shift a little bit and talk about Lindsey Graham. Well, his first statement actually is going to tie in with the recent Trump statement. So let's go ahead and play this clip from Lindsey Graham.
In the meantime, you mentioned the rare earth minerals deal that has been stalled after the disastrous meeting at the White House last week.
Disastrous.
But listen, you were one of the folks who met with President Zelensky before he went there. Senator Chris Van Hollen was as well. He was with me on the show last week. Here's how he described that deal.
It was extortion, pure and simple. It would be like in the middle of World War II, FDR saying to Churchill, we're not going to help you against the Nazis and Hitler unless you give up half of your mineral resources and half of your coal.
All right, 2 things. What do you make of his characterization of the deal? And he was explaining it as we understood it at that time. Maybe it's evolved. But secondly, do you think that his Democratic colleagues or that he urged Zelensky to go to the White House and reject the deal?
No, I don't. But what Chris said, I like Chris personally, is just ridiculous. We're trying to integrate our economies. We're trying to make sure that Ukraine has value to the American economy, a win-win situation. They're the richest country in Europe in terms of critical minerals, which is the oil of the 21st century. So doing a deal with Ukraine is beneficial to both countries. It's not extortion. Wouldn't it be nice to be able to do a deal with Ukraine where we can make $500 billion in the critical mineral space for our own economy, give them money, help them develop their resources so they can grow their economy and defend themselves? That's not extortion. That's a good business deal. And to all these Democrats who are worried about this deal, what the hell did you do to deter Russia from invading Ukraine? What did you do after Russia invaded Ukraine? Pretty much nothing. President Trump's going to end this war justly. We should do this critical minerals deal. We should keep arming Ukraine and providing them intelligence until a ceasefire. And we should tell Russia, if you don't engage in ceasefire discussions, we're going to sanction you.
So I like this clip because it plays 2 really uninformed clips from 2 U.S. senators. The first is Chris Van Hollen, who has said this a couple of times now that, we just helped Britain during World War II. No, there was the Lend-Lease Act. And so the Americans were paid back for a lot of the weapons that they sent to the UK during that conflict, which I was kind of surprised that Lindsey Graham didn't bother to bring that up or apparently doesn't know that part of history. But then Graham goes on, to explain, and he has all these slogans that rare earth minerals are the oil of the 21st century and everything else. And this is all just selling points to Donald Trump. But what he's really laying out, I think, is a threat that could keep Donald Trump from ending this war, which is basically they feel they're so economically integrated with Ukraine, so invested on getting these minerals from Kiev and from the Ukrainians, that then they're going to defend Ukraine from further Russian advances. And this is especially interesting because a lot of these minerals are in regions of Ukraine either under threat from being taken by Russian forces or are already under control of Russia. And so this could be like kind of a backdoor security deal. And really, again, I've been warning about this since Lindsey Graham first made this point in November, that this is what he's cooked up. This is what he's planning. He's also planning to introduce a bill in the Senate that will essentially do what Donald Trump explained in that True Social post, the banking, the additional sanctions on Russia. I'm not sure they're going to have a real effect. The Russian economy is heavily sanctioned by the United States already. And so the idea that they're going to be sanctioned more is very questionable as to what effect that will have. But if we go down this road of sanctioning Russia and economically embracing Ukraine, it's a recipe for this war to extend through the Trump administration. Now, maybe even a more infuriating quote from Graham comes in this next clip. So let's go ahead and play it.
Well, number one, the guy who's in charge now, Golani, was associated with al-Baghdadi. He's wearing a suit. Does that mean he's no longer a jihadist? I don't know. But their actions are very reminiscent of what happened in Iraq and Syria when ISIS took over. They're going after their religious enemies. The Alawites are Shiites. These guys are Sunnis. They're killing Christians. I am very worried. I would urge the administration to have somebody focused on Syria. Saudi Arabia is talking to Golani, the head of HTS. If you're going to talk about removing sanctions on Syria, you better have conditions to make sure they meet them before you remove those sanctions. Is this Al-Qaeda or ISIS light, or is this some new form of Islam that we can all live with? I don't know, but I've never been more worried about the deterioration of Syria than I am now. The world needs to get engaged with Syria before it's too late.
So this is absolutely infuriating. Lindsey Graham, who has spent 14 years advocating for regime change in Syria. I actually went back and I just pulled some quotes before we came on. In 2012, Graham was saying we need to form a coalition to help arm the rebels, as well as create a no-fly zone and no drive zones to stop the slaughter of the Assad regime. He was one of the first senators to repeat the Obama administration line that Assad must go. Assad must go. Even the next year in 2013, when it was presented to him that many of the arms that were going to the Syrian resistance were ending up in the hands of Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and that they were taking over the opposition to Bashar al-Assad, and that was effectively who the Americans were helping. Lindsey Graham said that the jihadists are hijacking the Syrian revolution in 2013, but that didn't change his policy. In fact, even in 2015, just 2 years later, Graham was saying, he was actually saying that, sure, the resistance is infiltrated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, but we need to first take out Bashar al-Assad, and then we'll help the moderate resistance fight against the terrorists. This is simply insane policy that now those very terrorists that we helped, that Lindsey Graham personally helped, vote after vote after vote, statement after statement after statement, for over a decade, he helped to support this regime change in Syria, when our current national security director of national intelligence, DNI, Tulsi Gabbard, was trying to introduce bills that would have prevented American funds from going to Al-Qaeda groups, trying to undermine the Barack Obama regime change that she talked about during her confirmation hearing. We talked about it on the show. She brought up the Timber Sycamore program. This is what Graham was talking about when the weapons are being hijacked by Al-Qaeda. The Obama administration, the senators, they all knew that what they were doing in Syria in 2011, in 2012, and all the way up and through 2024, when the Biden administration finally helped Abu Mohammed al-Jilani, a veteran of the Iraq War who fought against the Americans on behalf of Al-Qaeda in Iraq during the Iraq War, is now in charge in Syria. They knew all along that this was the policy, that this was going to happen, and yet they supported it anyways. And now Lindsey Graham is just going to go on one of our top cable news shows and say, without being challenged, I'm very worried about the situation in Syria. How could the host who is I think Shannon Bream, not say to him, but Senator, this is what you advocated for. This is what you supported. This is what you voted to spend tens of billions of dollars of American taxpayer dollars on. You celebrated this for over a decade. How can you now just flippantly say that you're very worried about the situation? You're responsible for the situation. It's not that you could just be worried about it. If you're worried about it, then you should step down because you put Al Qaeda in charge in Damascus. This is terrible. This is the worst possible outcome. And yet this is exactly what Lindsey Graham advocates for. And again, no challenge whatsoever, no question whatsoever. And of course, this is supported by administration after administration. You know, it's the Obama administration that gets most of the blame for this because Barack Obama allowed his ogre, John Brennan, to just ship weapons after weapons after weapons to the Sunni resistance to Bashar al-Assad. At the same time, the director of national intelligence at the time, Michael Flynn, wrote a memo and explained that this program is going to lead to an Islamic Caliphate, ISIS, al-Baghdadi's group that was chopping heads, boiling people alive, setting them on fire, mass beheadings that they were televising. All this was predicted, and yet they said that's okay because the goal is to take Iran down a peg. Because Bashar al-Assad helped Iran to arm Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, and because Hezbollah could stand up to Israel, we had to take Assad down, even if that meant bringing Jolani, bringing Al-Qaeda, bringing ISIS into power. This was the policy all along. Now, Trump takes a step in the right direction. He ends the CIA's Timber Sycamore program. However, he then places crippling sanctions on the Syrian government and, along with our NATO allies in Turkey, actively prevent Assad from going in and removing and getting rid of Jolani and his Al-Qaeda thugs in the Idlib province of Syria. For years and years and years, this is the case. And if they were crushed then, they wouldn't have been able to once again receive American support under the Biden administration. We know at least they got some serious drones from the Ukrainians. And of course, anything Kiev has, they got from the Americans. And so we funneled them through Ukraine to Syria, where they then helped these jihadist groups take out Assad's government, bring upon the downfall of Bashar al-Assad, and these massacres, hundreds, probably over 1,000 now, Alawite civilians, execution, mass execution, graves being filled in Syrian villages with all the men, all the Alawite men in the entire village gunned down, killed, mass graves. All of this is at the feet of Lindsey Graham, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and even Donald Trump. So next up here, I have another clip from Donald Trump in his interview with Maria Bartiromo.
He took money out of this country under Biden like candy from a baby. It was so easy with that same attitude. And I just don't think he's grateful. We gave him, in my opinion, $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion. We gave him $350 billion, and he's talking about the fact that they have fought, and there's a bravery because somebody has to use the weapons. But without those weapons, don't forget, I was the one that gave him the javelins that was able to knock down all the tanks. Obama gave nothing. Look, if I were president, that would have never happened. You wouldn't have had Russia going into Ukraine. You wouldn't have had the whole situation with Hamas and October 7th. It would have never happened because Iran was broke. They had no money. They weren't giving it to Hamas or Hezbollah or anybody else. You would have never had the worst evacuation anyone's ever seen, which is Afghanistan.
So again, I just think I want to bring up this clip because he ties everything that's happening in Ukraine to weakness all over the world. And of course, you know, we were strong enough, and that's why October 7th happened. So now I want to move on and talk about Shannon Bream. She's the Fox News Sunday host, and she interviews Adam Bowler, who is Trump's envoy for hostages in the Middle East, and she asks him a couple questions. And at times, I think it's almost more important to break down the questions than the answers, because to a lot of Americans, when they hear the question being asked, they think that's the issue, the most important issue at hand. They think that the host is presenting it in a fair and balanced way. Like, what is your opinion on this topic? And so when she exposes, herself here, I think it's really important. So let's go ahead and play the first clip from Shannon Breen.
How difficult is it to sit down with the leaders of an organization that torture, that murder people? I mean, the most recent example that has grabbed hearts and minds are the children, the Bibas children, 4 years old, 9 months old. Do you worry that having direct conversations with them gives this group any kind of veneer of respectability or legitimacy on the world stage?
So this is a part of the propaganda push that now exists in Washington, that you can't talk with anyone ever, right? Whether it's Kim Jong-un, Vladimir Putin, Xi, the Ayatollah, Maduro, Castro, whoever it is around the world, anytime we talk to a leader on the official American enemies list, you're bestowing legitimacy upon them. Not that Putin doesn't rule in Moscow, or Xi doesn't rule in Beijing, or the Kim family doesn't dominate North Korea. No, they only get that because Donald Trump talked to them and bestowed some magical legitimacy upon them. And if she wanted to ask a fair question, then why not mention, how can you sit down with Benjamin Netanyahu, who just slaughtered more Palestinian children, starved Palestinian children to death, has killed tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in Gaza over the past year and a half? How can you sit down next to him? No, that question is never asked. It's just, how can you sit down next to the evil Hamas? She's trying to make it so that it's politically untenable for the U.S. to ever negotiate with Hamas in the future. Now, let's pay her second question to Adam.
So obviously, there's a lot of widespread reporting that Israel did not like this idea of the U.S. having direct talks with Hamas. That they, in fact, found out once it was already underway, or it had happened. You got a call from Ron Dermer, the head of their strategic affairs. It was described as a very heated phone call. Only you can tell us what actually happened on that call. Why did the U.S. move ahead with these direct talks, knowing Israel had objections? And where would you say the relationship is now post the Dermer phone call?
This question is utterly baffling, right? How could you possibly do this without consulting the Israelis first? It's like she's saying, you are subservient to Tel Aviv. All questions must run through Tel Aviv. If you want to talk to Hamas, you must ask Netanyahu first and get his permission. What the hell is this? We are the United States of America. Israel gets $20 billion of aid from us, not the other way around. They are dependent on us. They are the vassal state. America is supposed to be the center of the world empire. And the question is utterly disgraceful. And the only thing more baffling than the question is Adam's response. And let's play that now.
I would say that the Israelis were kept informed. I did have a discussion with Ron. Ron raised some concerns, and quite frankly, it's totally fair for Israel to have concerns if we're having direct contacts with Hamas. For all he knows, he doesn't know me. Maybe I would meet them and say, they seem like such nice guys. Let's have beer and chips with them. So I think there was concern. I think I was able to put him at ease, that I wasn't going to go off the rails, that it would be parameters that we would work on together. So I thought that stuff was natural, and there's no question in my mind that our greatest ally is Israel.
It's the contrast between how Israel versus Ukraine is treated is utterly baffling. I mean, can you imagine the Trump administration saying after the Zelensky summit that, things got a little bit out of hand, but we want to ensure the Ukrainians that they're our greatest allies and that we have the utmost respect for them? This idea that Adam isn't saying that, excuse me, the Israelis need to thank us for all the support that we have given them, the $20 billion in military aid, the endless shipments of bombs that we have sent them, the fact that we look beyond their illegal nuclear program, that we ignore American law after American law to send more arms to Ukraine. I think, Judge Napolitano is one of the few who does this, but this is a great point that both Blinken and now Marco Rubio, our secretaries of state, have time and time again perjured themselves to lie to Congress that there's an emergency and that you can't possibly vote or have oversight on the weapons we sent to Ukraine because right now, or Israel, because right now the Israelis need them so bad. It's an absolute lie, but they continue to tell it. We ignore all these American laws, all these American values. We weaken our international standing for Israel. And then when we're trying to tamp down on the war, tamp down on the Israeli aggression, the Israels chastise the United States. And rather than giving Netanyahu the Zelensky treatment as Trump should, we say, oh no, the Israelis, yes, we have the utmost respect for them. We understand why they're nervous, but they have nothing to be upset about. We love Israel. We'll do everything we can for Israel. We just constantly have to reassure the Israelis that there's no concern about ever losing American support. This is crazy, but this is status quo in the United States. And now, one last clip we have on today's show. But before we play this clip, if you haven't already, make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you catch every episode Mondays and Wednesdays, almost always at 4:45. So it's very easy to remember, and check it out and watch. And then, of course, if you have any feedback on today's show or you got something you want me to talk about in the next show, go ahead and drop us a comment, and let's play this last clip.
So the president put up a stark warning on social media with regard to Hamas and getting the hostages out. He said, turn them over or it's immediately over for you. He says a beautiful future awaits. But if you don't turn over the hostages, you are dead. Release the hostages now or there will be hell to pay later. What's the deadline and what's the hell to pay?
You know, he didn't set a deadline, but let me just look at when he's done it before. I remember actually a week ago, I was in Baghdad, and there's a little mark of the spot right where al-Soleimani's car with an Iraqi in it, right where it was hit by 2 missiles. And there's a little spot. We all got out to look at it. And I remember the day he did it. I actually happened to be the West Wing, but it was surprising. No one else would do it because they were afraid. And this is what I will say. It may seem like he makes empty threats until he carries out the threat. And then it's not so empty, and then you're dead. And so I think in these situations, and he's done the same thing with Iran, they are walking a line on Iran because it's not so hard for us to partner with Israel and take out that nuclear capability, which probably should do.
Well, several examples, as you note, the president's action come to mind. Adam Buller, thank you for your time. Just know the prayers of folks around the world are with you in this work. Thank you.
Again, almost more shocking than the question about this Truth Social post that Trump put out. Highly disturbing because, in here, he really does say that, we're going to conduct mass killings in Gaza, not just of Hamas, just the general Gazan population. And seeing how he's already called for the ethnic cleansing, and the Israeli finance minister, one of the most hardline members of the Israeli coalition, Bezalel Smotrich, recently came to the United States and is now saying that Trump's ethnic cleansing plan for Gaza is already underway. We're going to expel 5,000 to 10,000 Palestinians every single day until we end up getting the entire population out. That's what the Israelis are talking about right now. But what Buller says here is just unbelievably sadistic. He says that you remember that time that the Americans killed the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, who was actually in Baghdad on diplomatic mission to try to reduce tensions between the Sunni and the Shia in the Middle East, between Riyadh and Tehran, and that the Americans under Donald Trump killed Soleimani, leading to a missile exchange where an American base in Iraq was hit with over 100 American troops receiving concussions or traumatic brain injuries from the event. And this is just a celebration. He went to the spot it happened to memorialize a killing. I mean, in Soleimani's role in Iraq, prior to that killing, by the way, was rallying the Shia militia of Iraq together to fight against the Islamic State. It's just, that response was unbelievable. I had to play it for you guys on the show. All right, that will do it for the episode today. For all of you watching live, I really appreciate you turning in. We had a number of you listening live today on YouTube. Just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Again, give us some feedback. Let us know what you think of the show, and we'll be back with another episode soon.